A plane skidding off the runway in New York. A Delta jet slid off that runway when trying to land at LaGuardia Airport. The tail of the plane on the ground, a wing broken. Hello everyone, I'm Ty Hernandez in New York. Authorities say that all of the people have now gotten off the plane and that only a few have suffered minor injuries. All runways, though, at LaGuardia Airport now closed until 7 p.m. Right now, let's bring in ABC's Josh Haskell, who is at LaGuardia Airport. Josh, what can you tell us? What's going on?
Hey Ty, we're here in Delta's Terminal D, and we were just waiting inside the arrivals where passengers finally were able to get off that plane. They were waiting for their bags to be unloaded. We know one person has been transported with minor injuries per the FDNY, and there were 125 passengers on board that plane that, as you said, skidded off the runway. Just to give you an idea, it is snowing here. It's been snowing since the early morning hours, and conditions are pretty bad. At this time, the airport is open, but the runways are closed. Also, many of these passengers that are getting off actually have to now wait in this cab line, which is something that is very characteristic of LaGuardia here. They're waiting for taxis. We spoke to a few of them earlier, and I want to quickly walk inside and bring in ABC's Gio Benitez, who spoke with some of those passengers. He can let us know what they said, but again, a pretty snowy scene for you outside, and people, the cab line right now comprises of people whose flights either got canceled because, as we said, the runways are closed, so they're making other travel arrangements, or people that were on that plane. The plane was coming from Atlanta. There's quite a media scrum awaiting as passengers filter through LaGuardia right now, and that media scrum is here inside the arrival section of Terminal D. As I said, I'm going to bring in ABC's Gio Benitez right now to give us a little idea of what passengers were telling you.
Well, Josh, you know, they were saying that it felt like a movie. Like they felt that, one said, they felt as if Denzel Washington was there at the wheel with this plane because they just felt it was so bumpy, and they really thought that they were going into the water, and that's perhaps what was scary. One guy was telling me that, you know what, I really was preparing to start swimming because that's how close they were to the water. And we just got a photo from inside that plane, and you could see there out the window, you can see the water right there from some of those windows. Some of the passengers, they could literally see the water right next to them.
There were some reports about how fast that plane was going when it skidded off the runway. Did they tell you what they were feeling inside that plane?
You know what, they just said that it was very, very bumpy. That the moment that thing landed, it just was a very bumpy ride, as you can imagine. It's hard for us to even walk out here because that's how snowy it is and how slippery it is. Imagine what that must feel like in that plane.
And we know that one person per the FDNY was transported with minor injuries. Did any of the passengers tell you about how the rest of the people on that plane were doing?
They said that everybody fared pretty well. They said that they didn't see any major injuries. So that's the good news here. Everyone seems to be okay.
Thank you, ABC's Gio Benitez. So to give you guys an idea, I am in the arrivals section of Terminal D here in Delta. There's still a number of media crews that are waiting for passengers. We've seen some young girls wrapped in Delta blankets, and we've seen a number of other people that, you know, were very shaken up from this, and they really did not want to speak about what happened. But as you just heard from ABC's Gio Benitez, it sounds like quite a story to tell, and we'll have pictures and updates on all of our other platforms. Back to you, Ty.
Josh, it seems, looking at the pictures, and as one can imagine in an emergency situation, these are people who just got up and ran out to those airplane slides as soon as they could with just the clothes on their back, maybe not even able to grab a coat, as you described, two people wearing the Delta blankets. And it's been quite a process. Did you say at this point they're just collecting their baggage?
Yeah, and not all of them have collected their baggage. I thought it was going to be a major rush of passengers coming off. They've actually been coming off in waves. Some of them, we had heard, are still being questioned, either waiting for their bags. Some of them have carry-on that's still on board the plane. So in addition to check bag, they had to take off all the carry-on bags and wait for those here at the baggage claim in Terminal D. One other thing I wanted to mention, Ty, is that the visibility here at the airport is pretty bad. We can't even see the runways. So we've taken a drive around as we approached, and we tried to see the plane. We tried to find out where it is. We can't even locate it. We couldn't even see sirens out on the runway where we know that they are there still. There was a line of ambulances here at Terminal D. I would show that to you. They've left. There's still about 2 outside, but literally as we drove up, Ty, 20 ambulances waiting in the arrivals or the departure section, the upper level here in Terminal D, waiting for any injured passengers, and that's kind of been the scene here.
Fortunately, minor injuries only in this incident, but not great news for travelers who were hoping to get to destinations. Tell us what it's like there at the airport. Are there, is it red cancellation signs on all of the screens? What are people doing? Do you see a lot of people camped out there just waiting? Or, we saw that taxi line as well, where there are people just trying to leave the airport at this point.
Earlier, as I said, when we were in the departure section, the lines were incredibly long of people trying to figure out another way to get out. I talked to one person online. She said, we're seeing if there's flights out of JFK, if there's flights out of Newark, if there's another way. And that's the scene that we were seeing. People that were not on this plane, people that were on other flights that at this point have either been canceled or delayed. And as passengers continue to filter out, I just want to sort of show you guys the scene here. That is a passenger that's being interviewed by a number of media, just to bring you in real quick.
Okay, I see there's a lot of interest in talking to people.
Obviously, we can't hear because of the scene. Yeah, a lot of interest, definitely, Ty.
All right. Were you able to take a peek? I know your access is limited when you go in as a journalist to the airport. You can't go all the way through. But any word on the condition of the runways? Is that the main reason why the airport has essentially been shut down until 7 o'clock? Do they just need to catch up and get that snow out of there?
It sounded like the runway was shut down because it's protocol when an incident like this happens, when a plane skids off. As I showed you outside, it is snowing here. The runways are definitely not in great shape. I saw a number of bulldozers out here. And again, visibility is just that bad. But I think it has a lot to do with the fact that, this is a major incident here at LaGuardia. Not only do they have to investigate, they have to somehow figure out a way what they're going to do with that plane. As some of the pictures that have been circulating show, part of that plane is very, very close to the water. It's in a very precarious position, and it's obviously a very heavy plane. So it's most likely going to stay out there, especially with these deteriorating weather conditions as it continues to snow.
Other airport personnel out disseminating information to passengers, giving them any guarantees that this is all going to be back up and running after 7 o'clock?
I don't think there's any such thing as a guarantee when it comes to air travel. So I don't really think Delta is making any promises. I know that they're doing their best to clear those runways, to definitely, complete this investigation. But, the passengers are just getting out now to get their bags. This is probably going to be a very hectic, stalled travel day here at LaGuardia. If you want, I can bring you guys up the escalator just to give you an idea of what the second level's like if you want to come along.
Sure, Josh. Yeah, I mean, is there sort of a mass exodus from the airport at this point, or are there people camped out, going to wait it out in the airport until everything opens back up?
I wouldn't say camped out. There's some police through there, and there's some pretty big crowds that you can see. Who shouldn't be here are not going through that area, which is totally understandable because, as we've been talking about, no flights are leaving. But I want to give you a quick glimpse of the departure section, and I'm actually seeing that it looks pretty empty in here, but there are still some ambulances lined up. And there you can see, wow, I'm right now seeing about 6 ambulances lined up. Just here on scene, just in case. We know that the 125 passengers have been taken off the plane, but what we don't know is the condition of all of them.
Hey, Josh, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second here because we do have a news conference from the representatives from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. They operate this airport. Let's listen in.
Happily, there are only minor injuries that have been reported. At this point, we believe 2 passengers have been transported to hospitals. That number may change. The emergency response by the Airport Rescue and Firefighting, which is a division of the Port Authority Police, was exemplary. 4 ARF trucks responded, plus a stair truck. 14 ARF, Airport Rescue and Firefighters in total. Port Authority aviation staff at the airport had 50 people on the airfield. ARF response was in minutes. The Port Authority Police and ARF trained for this repeatedly. During the last 3 weeks, there were 2 ARF drills here at LaGuardia for exactly this circumstance. Last thing I'll report is that we expect to open the other runway 422 at approximately 2 p.m. Some flights have been diverted to Newark and to other airports. As Ron mentioned at the beginning of this conference, the NTSB is on the way to LaGuardia. We'll be cooperating with them closely, as with Delta. We're not going to speculate or comment on the causes of today's incident. With that, I'll turn it over to Gail Grimmett from Delta Airlines.
Thank you, Pat. This morning, upon landing, Delta Flight 1086 from Atlanta, LaGuardia exited runway 13. The MD-88 aircraft was carrying 127 customers and 5 crew members. Customers were deplaned safely and moved to the terminals on buses. They have subsequently been reunited with their families and are in the midst of going back home or into the city. We are working cooperatively with the Port Authority, the NTSB, and all officials during the course of this investigation. The safety of our passengers and our crews is Delta's #1 priority. I want to thank the extraordinary efforts of the Port Authority, ARF, the PAPD for their quick response in this situation. And I also want to express Delta's sincere appreciation to our crews for their professional and quick response to help keep our passengers safe and get them to the terminal safely. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. As I mentioned before, given the fact that the NTSB is on the way, we're not going to comment on causes, and we'll leave that to the NTSB. Pat Dolan.
What were the braking conditions on the runway?
Good question, Pat. Shortly before the incident at approximately 11:05, 2 planes landed and reported, quote, good braking action on the runways. The runway, this particular runway, had been plowed shortly before the incident, and pilots on other planes reported good braking action. Yes. Yes. I think the pilot did everything he could to slow the aircraft down. Obviously, the pilot and the co-pilot's good efforts were reflected in the fact that there were only minor injuries. Yes. Yeah, I think what you're referring to is what's called EMAS, which is a FAA-required area at the end of each runway here at LaGuardia, which slows aircrafts down if they overshoot. As I mentioned, approximately 4,500 to 5,000 feet down the runway, the plane veered to the left, so it did not make contact with the EMAS. Yes. Sure. The Port Authority is responsible for plowing and maintaining the runways in a clean, operable condition. The FAA decides which runways are used, which approach planes and pilots will use, and it's up to pilots to accept the designation of the FAA. Yes, sir. Okay, with respect to passengers, the chutes, as we understand, did not deploy. The Airport Rescue and Firefighting Division of the Port Authority Police was on scene. As I mentioned, there were 14 ARF firefighters on scene. You could see images of those ARF staff members on the wings helping passengers deplane, and the passengers deplaned were bused to a terminal here at LaGuardia. Yes. Fuel spill. There was a minor fuel spill. The fuel for a time was leaking out at a rate of about a gallon a minute. The fuel leak was stopped. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation is on scene. Port Authority, ARF, Airport Rescue and Firefighting crews applied foam, and the situation's under control. Obviously, I'd also note there was a significant presence by the fire department of the city of New York, and we thank them for their response. Yes. Minor injuries. Yes, minor injuries. It was level 5. We were at level 5 staffing, full staffing today, and it was snow condition 5. Yes. The plane did not make contact with the water. That was never a risk today. I don't know. I'd be speculating.
The plane came to rest nose high. Why was that?
Pat, yeah, it was on a berm or an embankment. Beyond that, I'm not going to speculate. Yes, sir.
About how long before the plane landed the last time the runway was allowed?
Minutes.
Minutes?
Yes.
2 more?
Yes, sir. No, that's not what I said. Two pilots who landed in the minutes before reported, quote, good braking action.
Is that, when people are looking outside and seeing this blizzard, what's anybody landing in that to begin with? Is that the kind of data point that you use to allow other pilots to come in?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
When people are looking outside and seeing this snow,
Sure.
a lot of people think, why is anyone taking off and landing it? So can you give us some sense of why those reports about the braking, how crucial are they in determining let's keep landing and having planes?
Well, look, the decision to allow planes to land, the decision which runway is used and which approach is used is up to the FAA. Obviously, the Port Authority consults closely. We had the right ARF staff on here at LaGuardia today. Given the conditions, they responded literally within a minute, and that runway had been plowed literally minutes before, and other pilots had reported good braking action. Yeah, ultimately, obviously, the pilot's decision to land. Last question, yes. I'm not going to address any of those questions. I think those are appropriately directed to the NTSB once they've commenced and finished their investigation. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Representatives of the Port Authority joined by an official from Delta Airlines talking about that plane that ran off the runway at LaGuardia Airport. That airport now closed until 7 p.m. Let's bring in ABC News aviation analyst Steve Gagnier to talk a little bit about the events from earlier today. Steve, we're told the runway was plowed beforehand, that previous pilots had said it was they had good braking action on that runway. Is this now pointing perhaps to pilot error?
Still too early to make that kind of call. A couple interesting things coming out of the press conference here. Initially, we thought that the aircraft had gone off the end of the runway, and that is not the case. About 4,500 to 5,000 feet down the runway, the aircraft veered off into grassy area and then up onto a berm, and then you'll see the pictures where we're just hanging over into over the water in the bay. So very, very interesting that there was loss of control, directional control, at some point shortly after touchdown. One of the things that this brings to mind is just, as we'll see in the pictures, it's just so close to going into the water. One, which would have been terrible, and people would have been injured. But the other thought is that if the aircraft had gone right, it would have gone into an active taxiway, could have hit another airplane, could have run into hangars. So, boy, this is one where you just say, we got out of this one with minimal problems, because this could have been a very, very serious accident.
You know, when you look at the pictures, you look at the driving snow, the snow on the ground, you think this plane slipped. It hit that snow and slipped. Is that a possible scenario?
It is, but we got to figure out why directional control was lost. I mean, we had a couple of aircraft that landed before this aircraft did. They've reported good braking action. Now, that's subjective. That's like if you and I were out driving in different parts of the town, and we were driving, and you said, how's the braking? And I said, oh, it's good. But maybe in your part of the town, or you drive in a place 10 minutes after I was there, where you said, whoa, in my car, this isn't very good braking. So there's a bit of a subjective assessment in when pilots say the braking is good or it's poor. So we don't really know how the airplane that was involved in this case, which is an MD-80, it's an older aircraft. It's a perfectly good aircraft, but there were a couple of newer aircraft that were perhaps lighter. So we're sort of comparing apples to oranges here in the sense of saying what happened as it went down the runway. The real key is, why was directional control lost so severely? If we look at those pictures, the aircraft ended up almost 90 degrees off runway heading. So that's think about going down the runway and coming to stop 90 degrees off your intended runway with a very heavy airplane that's going 140, 150 miles an hour. That's pretty serious. So what caused that shift, that loss of directional control? There could have been pilot error. Obviously, we'll look at that. But it also could have been mechanical error. Maybe there was a failure of one of the anti-skid systems and one of the brakes locked up. Maybe one of the thrust reversers wasn't working properly. So the NTSB will look at all these. But all in all, boy, this is we were really lucky on this one.
And as you mentioned, these are different types of planes. These planes are different ages. What may have been easier for pilots just on that runway previously may not have been as easy for the pilot of this particular plane.
Exactly, and the NTSB will go back and look at that. And when we talk about braking action, there's actually they'll drive up and down the runway with a vehicle in a car that has a sensor that measures braking action, and it gives a number. And when that number goes out and the pilots are told, hey, braking action is rated at a certain number, let's say it's a 4 out of a 10. And so they will take that into consideration. And when they're getting ready to land, they'll brief each other and they'll talk about, okay, we're on this runway. In this case, it's runway 13. We want to touch down here. The braking action may not be so good, so we'll make sure that we're doing this and that. So they will talk about it and they'll brief it before they land. But something unexpected here happened. And we'll have to ask questions. Did the pilot land too fast? Did the pilot land too long down the runway so that the speed was higher than it should have been? Was there other problems? Were there other problems in the way that the aircraft landing was performed? So lots of things to be looked at that the NTSB will do. They'll look at as we've seen in past mishaps, they'll look at the cockpit voice recorder to see what were the crew saying to each other throughout the whole flight. They'll look at the data that talks about everything that the airplane itself was doing, looking at all the systems. They'll be able to tell when the brakes were applied. So they'll be able to precisely determine at one point where the brakes applied, where they applied at the same time. Did the anti-skid systems work? So I think they'll find out what went wrong here pretty quickly. But this is one that hopefully we'll learn some cheap lessons from this one.
How lucky were the people on board? You imagine at this stage of the flight, you're buckled in, your seats are up, and you're preparing for landing, which is sort of the most stringent rules when you're on that plane. How lucky are they to have walked away from this unscathed, really? Just a couple of minor injuries at
really,
most.
really lucky. Now, if the airplane had continued off the end, there's an area at the end of the runway, and most runways that have short runways, the FAA has put in it's a barrier, and really what it is lightweight, crushable concrete, so that if an airplane's going off the end of the runway, the airplane will sink into this crushable concrete, and it will slow the aircraft very rapidly. So if this aircraft had stayed on heading and stayed going down runway 13, it probably would have been stopped by that barrier. It probably wouldn't have gone into the water. But in this case, because they lost control at 4,500 to 5,000 feet down the runway and ended up 90 degrees off and almost in the water, this could have been a very, very serious mishap. The miracle on the Hudson was just that. It's a miracle, and we can't expect something like that to happen twice, and we certainly can't expect no injuries to happen twice. But to have people going into cold water, the ability to swim or to save yourself in cold water is really diminished. So we really escaped a very terrible potential situation here.
Yeah, terrifying thought. There are reports that the control tower had difficulty communicating with this plane, that there were unanswered calls. What could that mean? That
the crew was a bit overwhelmed, because those calls were after the aircraft had touched down. And so they were trying to make contact with the aircrew in the cockpit. That aircrew was probably focused on evacuating the airplane and making sure that everybody gets out. One thing that we noted out of the press conference today is that they said the chutes didn't deploy. Now, if you look at some of the pictures where the nose is hanging over the water, obviously they made a right call and said don't deploy the chute that would be close to the water. Let's go to the back of the airplane and look at that. But if the chutes didn't, so those slides, when you open the door, that slide is supposed to come out. We saw that in the Denver incident yesterday, where the slides come down and everybody jumps on the slides and they slide off the airplane. For some reason, either they weren't deployed or they didn't properly deployed. That'll be another thing that the FAA and the NTSB will be looking at.
In the end, this may or may not have anything to do with the snow. How better equipped are we today in terms of technology on these planes to deal with weather, or should passengers be concerned about flying in this weather?
Well, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but weather always seems to play a role in most of the mishaps that we've been seeing lately. So weather was what we would call a contributing factor, certainly. On a day like today, if it was a bright sunny day in New York in summertime, with no with a good clean ice-free, water-free runway, would this have happened? Probably not, but maybe there was something wrong with the braking system. So we'll go back and look at that. But weather always plays a role in most mishaps. So sometimes it is an absolute factor. In the past we've seen mishaps where airplanes have been thrown into the ground by microbursts and things like that. Since then, we've developed radar that actually keeps planes away from those microbursts. But we're still seeing mishaps, especially in some third world countries or countries where their aviation infrastructure isn't as well developed, where airplanes run off the runway, where they crash in stormy weather. All to say, in the United States, the training and the airplanes have gotten so much better, and we continue to have much better mishap rates. But when we do see mishaps, it's quite often there's a role that weather plays in those mishaps.
Safe to assume the pilot is being thoroughly interviewed as well as the crew, and they've likely spoken to passengers as well?
Yep. And the crew debriefs will be important. One of the things that's so important in aviation safety is that every aviator, especially in the U.S. or Canada, understands that the only way you get safer is to fess up when you make mistakes. And so the crew is going to go in, and they'll have they'll be able to offer information that may be kept out of a court of law, what they call privileged information. But the crew needs to go in and tell the truth. And if everybody makes mistakes. Pilots make mistakes, I make mistakes, you make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes. But in aviation, what you want to do is minimize those mistakes and then have ways to counteract them. If you do make a mistake, who's checking up on you? How do you prevent that mistake from turning into a mishap? And the only way to do that is to be open and honest about when things go wrong.
In this type of situation, the pilot maybe has seconds to react?
Yeah, so you think about this. So it's nasty weather. I'm sure that there's lots of airplanes holding. The controllers are working hard. They probably broke out, meaning that they probably saw the runway at the last minute with the snow the way it is. But that should not have ended up as a mishap. I mean, U.S. airplanes fly in nasty weather all the time, and for the most part, none of them ever have a problem. But in this case, that runway slickness somehow we would think contributed to this mishap.
All right. Well, again, fortunate that no major injuries, maybe a couple minor injuries after this accident. And a very scary picture, as you point out, so close to the water. ABC aviation expert Stephen Ganyard, Colonel Stephen Ganyard, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And you can keep up with this story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring this story for exclusive updates on the go. I'm Ty Hernandez in New York.